But I thought what we begin with then, Hugh, was to talk about your your fascination with Wade Hemsworth. How did that begin, and what drew you to the songs of Wade Hemsworth?
Kate and Anna used to play his songs in Montreal, and I remember going to their concerts, and this would have been in the 1970s, around 76 or 7. And I remember, they would from time to time say, "Oh, this is a song by Wade Hemsworth." And I remember even in one of their concerts, they joked about not all of their songs being by Wade. But in any event, it sort of planted the seed that there was this songwriter who I'd never heard of, and this is pre-internet, of course, so it wasn't easy to quickly track him down. And then I do remember, I mean, this of course was a long time ago, but I do remember going to a concert that they gave in Wolfville, Nova Scotia, and I think the only Wade Hemsworth song they played there was the story of the I'm Alone. And I remember when Dane would sing in the chorus. I mean, it was a big rallying sort of chorus sound to it. And Dane specifically would sing the bass. And I just remember sort of my hair standing on end when I heard him sing the chorus of it. And I think that was the moment where I thought, well, this is just too much not to pursue. And so later I followed up. I hadn't met Dane or Kate or Anna at that point, but later I followed up uh, by going to Dane and Anna's apartment in Montreal, just unannounced, and ringing the bell to see whether they would give me some clues as to who Wade was. And Dane answered the door, and uh, and I explained that I was interested and was he still alive, and Dane said, yeah, he's still alive, lives up in Morin Heights. He's got a house up there and north of Montreal. And by the way, here's photocopies of all the songs that I have. But, I'm happy to introduce you and maybe go see him. So that's really where it took off, I guess. And that would have been around, I think, 1977 or thereabouts.
Yeah, that's an amazing story, and it's just like Dane, of course, to welcome you into the household and tell you everything that he knew.
Well, no, to be clear, he didn't welcome me into the household. Yeah, I was waiting at the door. He is very efficient.
He's very efficient, yes.
Yeah.
It's about that same time, Hugh, that I was hosting a radio show up north in Northern Ontario called Thursday North on CKAP, and it was syndicated throughout that part of Northern Ontario. And I had two songs that I played. My intro song was Bruce Coburn's Skylarking, and the exit song was Wade Hemsworth's the Black Fly song, which I still think is the anthem of Northern Ontario.
Mm.
So I knew Wade's music more or less at about the same time as you did. But of course, I did not know Wade. You had the one up on me there. However, I recall receiving a phone call from you maybe about 1979 or 80. I had published an issue of my magazine on an artist named Thoro MacDonald. And as I recall, you were interested in collecting artwork or illustrations or books that Thoro had illustrated, because I had published this book, Thoro MacDonald's Notebooks, in about 1980. Do you recall that at all? You're calling me up in those days?
No.
Okay. Well, wasn't long thereafter when I think you were stationed in Turkey and then later in Moscow that you would be calling me up and asking if I'd be interested in publishing a book on the songs of Wade Hemsworth. Surely you remember that.
Yes.
This book.
Yes, indeed. I will say the book you first held up, Thoro's Notebooks, that was the inspiration for me. In other words, the songs were one thing, but then finding the right way to express them. And they'd never been published before. He'd only allowed the Black Fly song to be published. So here was someone who had a wonderful legacy of songs. I didn't know the extent of it at the time, but I knew that the quality was extraordinary. And so what would be the right way to express it? And most music books are really done very cheaply, and they're not well designed. But I thought this was worthy of a beautiful design. So I had in my mind, I was looking for the sort of right way to express it. And that book that you held up by Thoro really captured the sense that I thought would go well with the song. So that's what led me to you, and then ultimately the book we created together.
When you met Wade Hemsworth then for the first time. Did you become bonded right away? Because obviously he must have been interested in your interest in his songs. Did he welcome you in that way, or did you just think maybe, oh yeah, here's another groupie?
No, I don't think he had many groupies up in the woods. No. He was a pretty taciturn, guarded person, I would say, quite stoic in his temperament. And but I think within the way he was welcoming. Yes, he was, I would say. So he was always gracious, made me feel certainly welcome. Yes, he did. And I don't think anyone had ever approached him about publishing his music before or doing a book of his songs as such. And I think, again, consistent with his kind of very guarded character, I think he always had the idea, I don't want to publish my songs. I don't want them just to be sold. He had sold the log, no, he had sold Wild Goose and Black Fly Song, I think, to ASCAP or one of those publishers, and I think he always regretted that. I may be getting that wrong, but so he kept copyright in all of his other songs, and he was very careful to protect them thereafter. So I think maybe less groupie, but more concerned about like, well, what are you going to do with these things, and will they be presented in the right way? And that reinforced my idea too at the time, like we have to do this really well, really to justify the effort of doing it. So I think probably he was looking at it like, is this a serious person who's going to do something serious with the music? Or I remember feeling welcome by him.
Yeah, yeah. And the book, of course, the songs of Wade Hemsworth, the illustration on the cover is by Thoreau MacDonald. And all of the illustrations, with the exception of a few, are in fact by Thoreau. The one in particular that is illustrated by someone else, that's someone else happening to be Peter Wally, is Remember Moose Mountain. They are black and white line drawings. Did you meet Peter Wally at about the same time, or did you ever meet Peter?
I can't remember. I remember Wade took me down to either it was his studio or a gallery that was featuring his artwork. And I can't remember whether I met him briefly there or not. I don't think I ever met him, but in our rambles around Morin Heights, Wade would speak of him and show where he lived and show me his artwork. So I felt some proximity, yeah.
In the book also, Hugh, there is a section at the back where you talk about filmography and discography and publications and so on about Wade and Wade's songs. And just at about that same time, of course, a Black Fly song was nominated for an Oscar, for an Academy Award. And was that perhaps the inspiration to turn the I'm Alone, the story of the I'm Alone, into a video?
That was the creation. I mean, the imagination of Wade and Peter together in designing the storyboard. I don't know whether it was Wade suggested the storyboard to Peter or Peter came up with it or how it came about. The beautiful storyboard that you have, right, and many pages of it, as I recall, right, John, and beautifully done. I mean, this wasn't just a few sketches; it was a fulsome storyboard, so it seemed to me anyway. But I had nothing to do with it, nor did I see in particular the animated potential of Wade's songs, whether it be the I'm Alone or Black Fly Song or Log Driver's Waltz, which became short animated films too, of course. So I don't remember that informing my sense of the book, but I did feel that when it came to Remember Moose Mountain and the drawings by Peter, that it just felt like it would be a useful addition to sort of try to bring that song to life.
I acquired the storyboard from Shirley Singer after Wade died, and there are 27 panels together with the panel that represents the chorus, which because at this point the I'm Alone is sinking, so there are several panels. As you know, there are 8 verses, therefore 8 choruses. And Peter Wally's instructions to the animator is to pan down. So in fact, the camera goes up while the boat's sinking. It's quite an interesting phenomenon. The animator whom we hired to do this, Alison Wolvers, was quite perplexed by this technology. In those days, of course, she knew nothing about the methodologies in those times, having been raised only on digital. The storyboard itself, as you say, is quite fulsome. It illustrates almost from beginning to end the entire narrative of the story of the I'm Alone. And of course, you know, the song is in a calypso beat. that's the way Wade wrote it. Do you sense that that Wade naturally played calypso, or did he imagine that this song was just suited to that style of music?
As I remember, he talked about playing with West Indian musicians in Montreal. So he had gone into that quite deeply. And I think when you look at his life and the songs he wrote, he seems to have really noodled over them for, very long periods of time, going into them quite deeply. Why he chose to combine the calypso rhythm with the song, I don't know. He always said it was meant to be of the locale, pointing out that it wasn't exactly the locale, West Indies being, much further south than where the ship sunk in the Gulf of Mexico. But I think he was probably he just probably felt it suited the song in a way that brought it to life. So I don't know. That's what I remember of it.
Do you see the song as like a sea shanty in the manner of, say, Barrett's Privateers by Stan Rogers?
Yes, I do. Yes, very much so. It's funny that Barrett's Privateers, of course, has got such traction, and I think the I'm Alone is at least the equal. But I guess it's a difference between being connected into the commercial, and I don't make light of it at all being commercial, but only to say being in the bloodstream of what people hear and see. I was looking on Spotify. As far as I can tell, no one's ever recorded the story of the I'm Alone other than Wade himself. And you could say that of a number of the songs. So even though we published them together and we put them out there and we preserved them forever, you and I, which I'm very proud of, that, it wouldn't have perhaps ever happened had we not done that. But it hasn't really entered into the mainstream of life. And I just always assumed it would take time, whether it was years or decades or even centuries. But I've no doubt that it will rise to the level of all the great shanties.
What's very interesting right now, you sent me a copy of an article in the Wall Street Journal last Saturday about the prevalence of sea shanties in terms of what TikTok is doing. But at the same time, Tom Power on CBC Radio program called Hugh, lately he has also been playing sea shanties. And I don't know why they have all of a sudden come back into vogue, or maybe they've always been there, but the main media hasn't been paying much attention. I know here on the East Coast in the Maritimes, you can't go into an Irish pub without hearing sea shanties. We have open sessions at the Poorhouse at the Old Triangle here in Charlottetown. And every Thursday night, there's at least one singer who will sing something like Barrett's Privateers or one of those response songs. Do you think that Wade's music, and we'll agree, I think that it is very eclectic in subject matter and style, but does it reflect his personality?
Most certainly. And I suppose you could probably say that of any composer in a way. But I think the heightened originality of all the songs, right? They're very eclectic. They're very different, not just eclectic in a similar way. They're very differently eclectic. And almost every one, you can see a piece of his soul in them. And this one, for example, on the I'm Alone, this calypso thing that he took to for a number of years, or the story of Montreal where he sings in Mohawk language. I mean, all their different parts of his life. Or even the song of the old rooster, where I think he's really talking about himself as a sort of gnarly old rooster beaten down by life and crowing to express his humanity. I think it's all himself, different facets of his personality.
I like your expression, a piece of his soul. And it sort of suggests that there's a bit of a visionary in Wade, not only looking forward, but also looking back and being able to tie the two time frames together into the present, into the now. And in that way, in a way, entrancing an audience or maybe captivating folks to pay attention.
I've often thought, like, what makes a song, like Home on the Range be something that is so almost, maybe, if not universal, at least widespread over time, and there's no reason to think that won't be sung 1,000 years from now, or as long as there's people coming together to sing. Whereas you take Early Morning Rain, which is a great song by Gordon Lightfoot, will that last in the same way? Maybe, we can debate, but there's no doubt that I think what Wade was able to do, and in ways I can't explain, but somehow or other create songs that are of that home on the range type, almost like, I think, drop a stone into the psyche of the collective in ways that has a deep kind of resonance. That's something I think Wade was able to achieve.
The word that's coming to me is universal, not only in terms of wrapping a blanket around a lot of different people from different ethnic backgrounds in language and so on, but also in the terms of, say, Buffy Sainte-Marie's song, Universal Soldier. We all live the same life, just in different manners. And yet it's the same life. We share that in a manner that makes us who we are. And that's maybe wherein we find the essence, or what you have called soul. And we reflect it in the way we live our lives. And yet we're all one. Maybe that's a bit too philosophical, and the songwriter doesn't think of those things when he's composing.
He did think of those things, as I recall, and specifically in one of his songs, I forget one, the name escapes me at the moment, but he was incorporating some Greek themes and music, and he was very much of, look, we're all connected, we're all part of the same world, and the fact that you have all these different strands in the music is what makes it richer, and where he brought his originality from. So he wasn't trying to be diverse in that sense, but he was embracing the diversity of the world in what he did. There's no doubt that was a big, strong component. And people, in Canada, very much focus on, is it Canadian or not, or how Canadian is it? But he always, I think, broke down that idea that it wasn't like, we're not trying to create Canadian music as opposed to other music. We're just trying to create music that speaks to us all, and we may embrace many different musical trends or aspects into the songs he created.
Now, the story of the I'm Alone, of course, is a ballad that narrates the sinking of the schooner, the I'm Alone, in the Gulf of Mexico during Prohibition. This story takes place in 1929, which is when the United States Coast Guard chased down the schooner, captained by John Randall from Newfoundland. This also happens to be the 100th anniversary of the start of Prohibition in the United States. So it's somewhat appropriate, I suppose, that we perform the story of the I'm Alone in video form on Wade's behalf at this 100th anniversary. But I know also that on the 25th anniversary of the sinking of the I'm Alone, the Maclean's magazine published 25th anniversary 1954 article. And of course, at that time, Peter Wally, the cartoonist who illustrated our story of the I'm Alone, was working for Maclean's as a cartoonist, political satire primarily. And then 5 years later, they did another article written and published by James Bannerman on the whole story, including the references to the future Governor General Vincent Massey, who was responsible partly as a cultural attaché to have John Randall and his crew freed. That would be 6 years after the event took place in 1929. But do you think this song, The Story of the I'm Alone, is political commentary by Wade?
He wasn't a political guy. At least I never saw him as a political sort of person. I think he identified with John Randall and that defiance that comes through loud and clear in the song. I'd never heard him suggest that he was imagining himself to be Captain John Randall, but that defiance in the face. So he had a bit of that surly defiance himself. So I think that was, if you call that political, then yes. But I think it was more in the nature of, it's a kind of a very Canadian thing, and I think you have it too, John, which is, I'm a quiet, nice guy, but don't take away my dignity. That kind of quality. I think he very much had that.
I was speaking with Elizabeth Wally yesterday, and she is now living in the house where Peter Wally lived in Morin Heights, and behind her was a portrait that her father had done of her when she was a child. And it reminded me a great deal of some of the artwork that Wade did when he was a student and afterwards at the Ontario College of Art. He graduated from the OCA in 1939. And of course, Peter Wally was also a student at the Nova Scotia School of Art and Design. So they both had training as visual artists. And that painting, that portrait of Elizabeth Wally in her home yesterday, reminded me of the portrait that Wade did of Irene when they were students together at the OCA. I don't have it with me right here now, but there's also a very touching one of Shirley that I don't have. But then there's also one, a self-portrait that Irene did. It shows her as a very unhappy woman. And what I'm wondering about is if some of the songs that Wade wrote, for example, My Humble Home, I've forgotten the exact title of it, would that have come from his own personal experience in his family relationship, do you think?
Yes, for example, Foolish You, which is perhaps his most famous song because it was recorded by Kate and Anna McGarrigle, is clearly, and he told me so, Irene badgering him. And Humble Home clearly was how he expressed his ideas about life and how he fit into it, yeah. Or Ocharna, which is not in the book, about Shirley Singer, who you mentioned, which is a magnificent song. But again, that was his expression of his love for her and capturing it. Although he never uses her name, but he captured the spirit of that relationship.
Do you recall having heard Jack Nicholson sing the story of Yamalone when the McGarrigles were playing? Was he in Wolfville at the time that you heard?
He might well have been. I certainly heard him sing with the McGarrigles from time to time. I can't remember which ones in particular, but he may have been there. He
Yeah.
would be part of that chorus. And a lovely guy too, by the way.
You're part of the Mountain City Four with Peter Weldon and Kate and Anna and a few other. You mentioned Dane Lankin as another. I know that Wade has said at one time that Jack sings the song better than he does. And of course, Jack deferred to Wade saying, no, that's not possible. Only you can do it the way you can. You, of course, are the executive producer of the video animation of the story of Yamalone. And Peter Weldon is an executive producer, as well as Wade Hemsworth, Wade's nephew, and Jane McGarrigle as well. We had a number of consultants as well. So the feedback goes all the way back to the creation of the song, it seems to me, back that 40 or 50 years, which lends a great deal of authenticity to the whole story. In other words, the story of the Yamalone. I think that is one of the interesting characteristics of this whole venture that we've undertaken. How would you classify Wade then? We talked about this briefly a little while ago, in terms of the sort of iconography of Canadian music, folk music in particular. Because he was so understated, he did not seem to seek the limelight, as others did. Maybe Lightfoot didn't seek it so much. He just was everywhere. It was very popular. But where would you classify Wade in the context of those musicians? Say Joni Mitchell, Gord Lightfoot, Stan Rogers, Bruce Cockburn?
I always remember I wanted to do a book about Ian Tyson, about his music, who I think very highly of him and what he's managed to create. I remember talking to Peter Weldon about it, who was a great help to me, at least during all those years of creating the book together, and now this film too. Amazing 2-year longevity story. I'll come back to that if I may in a moment. But Peter always said, well, look, Ian's got all this great attention. He's famous, from Newport Festival. He's got records, but Wade is the real deal, and he really is more worthy in that sense of the attention you're devoting to Wade. And I thought, I reflected on it, and I have ever since. And I do believe, to your question, I think ultimately, of course, he's so different because his music has never been well known or recorded. And then you have these funny, these kind of eclectic glimpses into it through the animated films, right? Through the Log Driver's Waltz and the Black Fly, which have really hit deeply into the Canadian psyche, as we know. But I consider his songs to be without peer. I think he's truly greater than all of them. That I think his songs will last longer than all composers we now know today, including all those in Canada's history.
Do you think they share a common audience? Those musicians that we're referring to, Ian Tyson, Stan Rogers, Gordon Lightfoot, Wade Hemsworth, is the audience the same for all those musicians?
Well, there probably is an idiom, right? There's the say Greenwich Village 60s folk, and then there's whatever happened since then, right? The sort of commercial strands that have come together and created a market and then influence themselves. So they become very much interconnected in that way that Wade neither was personally nor his music ever has been. So I think they are a different audience, and I think if that's underlying a bit your question, which is I think uh, almost like someone like a Wade is almost reaching back to Woody Guthrie or Lead Belly or the precursors in a way to the more modern era, but I think will in the course of time stand far above it.
Sure, and I think Adrienne Clarkson in that interview she did with Wade after the 1991 Winnipeg Folk Festival, was it 91 or 92 perhaps?
Yeah.
In fact, I think she interviewed Wade both on Take 30 with Paul Soles on CBC television, as well as later on another TV show that she had. And I forget if it was Post Governor General or not. But the sense of Wade as an icon, as someone who is a bellwether for what Canada represents, and I think you alluded to that as well. He's almost the atypical Canadian, and he's able to put those words into some form of music that represent who we are, unashamedly.
You know, one of the sad parts, in a way, of his life was how few songs he wrote. Um, and one would have to. I always wondered why he didn't go more forcefully into a life of composing and making music his life. He was a draftsman, for his life, and music was just something he I wouldn't say dabbled with, but he never made it his primary focus. And what might have he created had he devoted himself fully to it? This we don't know. On the other hand, you can well imagine were he to be, having to make albums like all the other people in the commercial world, there'd be a lot of songs, there'd be a lot of mediocre songs. You never would have perhaps managed to create those deep essences that each of his songs now represents. So I don't know. History will tell, but it is a kind of a very unique feature of his life that he chose not to make music his primary occupation, and that may explain part of the enduring quality of his songs.
Yes, and I think the humility that he lived through and personified in many ways.
That's a wonderful word for him. He really was a very humble person, humble in his temperament, in his relationship with people, and I think his aspirations. But he was proud of his songs. He knew they were great songs, but I think he had a genuinely humble sense of what he was creating and the purpose it would serve.
Yeah. We've had a great deal of success at film festivals with the videotape of the I'm Alone. And I'm wondering, you mentioned pride, how proud he would be of his own songs. Do you recall when the Blackfly song was nominated for an Academy Award, if he exhibited any kind of pride or enthusiasm?
No, that wasn't his style. He would have been quietly proud, sort of, yep, good, yep, but wouldn't he wouldn't express it in a more exuberant way, nor even secretly would he attach great meaning to it.
So his ego was not taking over his everyday life.
No, truly not. Yeah. Truly not.
I haven't really talked too much about you as the executive producer, and without your support and financial support in particular, of course, and vision, this would not have happened at all.
About the story of the story, to your earlier comment, I think both, and also you talked about the interest, the long-term interest of the participants in this film. And I think that says a lot, that the people who have been involved believe in the song and believe in Wade, and I think that says a lot in and of itself. But and you personally, of course, you published this book in '91, but he entrusted you with the idea, at least, and the manuscript to create the film. So there was a strong bond, obviously, you had with him, and he obviously respected you greatly. But it's one thing to have an idea; it's another thing to see it through. And of course, we weren't exactly sure, you and I, what form that might take. But the only point I smile about to myself is how what triggered this, at least my involvement, was visiting you back in PEI, driving my mother home to Halifax, and it was the maybe the randomness of life, that I said, well, let's go see John in PEI. So we did a detour through New Brunswick over to PEI just to go see you. And then we had our short time together, which was delightful. And which you said, well, I've been thinking about this storyboard, wonder what we could do with it. What do you think? And you weren't soliciting my help, but you were, I guess, talking about a shared sort of sense of passion that we had, or purpose that we had, as kind of carrying on Wade's legacy. Not that anyone ever asked us to do it. And that's really, at least to me, where I got involved. And I think in that sense, where it sort of, where the project really, began to turn and went through all the steps that we went through. And so I just think of that coincidence of that particular moment, or the serendipity of it, that if we just kept on going to Nova Scotia, we might not have this film.
Yeah, you're probably right. But that energy that was created at that time spun off a lot more energy, a lot more creative energy. And of course, yes, we have the product now to show it. But, I went to Holland College here in Charlottetown and got one of the classes involved in creating a video through the vice president at Holland College, who was a friend of mine, an acquaintance, I should really say. And they took it upon themselves as a project for that semester. This is 2 years ago now. And of course, that never did come to fruition. They couldn't agree on the final form of the animation. However, that did lead me to Alison Wolvers, who had been a student in that class 5 years before. And the teacher of the class, Chris Sharpley, highly recommended her. And of course, she had never done an animation of this kind before. It was brand new for her. But she took it on with incredible enthusiasm and energy and insight and vision and humor as well. She could see the humor in the story, and she could see, as with Wade, the visionary elements to it. And just, it was a wholesome relationship between her and the song and the art. So that was very positive as well.
Yeah, it's almost like the pursuit of the goal brought us alive too, or in new connections and new ways. Yes. I'm sure you must experience that with all your books, right? In some degrees, but this one does feel very fruitful. It's brought us into new and interesting areas. You touch on humor and talk about humility, but humor was also a huge part of Wade's thinking about things. He'd have a laugh and such, but you wouldn't think of him as a funny guy at all. But there's such a strong strand of humor in all of his songs, and I guess to me they're connected. It's somehow the way he expressed his sort of modesty and kind of ironic detachment from life, or something in that zone. That was a big part of his personality, although not on the surface.
What I recall about him in that regard, with your comment about humor, is whenever something went really well in his life and he would break into a smile, he would say, "Hurrah!"
Yeah,
that would be the loudest expression I've ever heard from him. Even in his correspondence, he would use the word hurrah with an exclamation mark when he wanted to make a point, make it very clear. So there's nothing else you think that we need to say to wind this up?
Really surprises me, reflecting on it all these years later, how few people have sung his songs. It's really extraordinary. So I think if someone were to watch us and would ask, well, you say these songs are so great, but like, why hasn't anyone recorded them? Of course, one answer is Wade recorded them, but Wade didn't have a very good voice. I mean, and it doesn't age very well the way he sang them. But you certainly could have, it just puzzles me why more, and people who crave content, right? I mean, finding a good song is the name of the game. And these are even rare songs, right? And they're there, right? I mean, he's recorded them, the book is there. Just can't understand that exactly. Or maybe they're just too old-timey, I don't know.
Peter Weldon has a really great story in that regard. And it has to do, I think, the purity of folk music. And it had to do with, or was it Wade Hemsworth? I think it was Wade, the nephew, who told me this, that he bumped into Bruce Cockburn. And it might have been when Wade was inducted into the Canadian Music Hall of Fame, something like that. And when Bruce Cockburn heard of Wade Hemsworth's name, the nephew, they spoke. And Bruce told him that the way he got to know Wade's songs was at camps up in Algonquin Park during the summer months. That's how we learned the Blackfly song. And
Mm.
maybe that's the pure tradition of folk music that is sung around campfires in people's living rooms and kitchen parties, that sort of thing, rather than formally in a performance hall with all of the bells and whistles and so on.
Someone like him, I'm sure he would have looked at the book and seen the songs and listened to the record, or if not him, others, of comparable strength. Just
Yeah.
interesting they wouldn't have chosen to record some of them more. And even I don't say with any bitterness. It's just sort of a surprising thing to me. In fact, in many ways, it allows them to stay pure and untouched in a way for another day.
Well, Hugh, thank you very much for this. It's always good to talk to you and for the insight
Thank,
you shared on the story of the I'm Alone, and also, of course, your friendship with Wade. That's so important to all of us. And
thank
may
you.
it carry on.
Yeah. Let it be so.
Yeah. Have a great weekend.
Okay, John. Thank
Say
you.
hello to Celia for me.
I will. Thanks, John.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.